Well, I guess it's time to start pulling injectors. Thanks for tuning in and welcome back to the shop. This is our 2013 Mitsubishi Fuso FG and we're turning it into an overland camper. For the last couple of months there hasn't really been much building going on because I've been fighting an issue with the engine not starting. And after going through a lot of diagnostics, I'm pretty sure I've chased it down to a failed CP4 fuel pump, which I changed out last week with my spare from this engine. Which means everything downstream needs to be taken out and cleaned. Now, since I have already been working on this, I've already got some of the wiring unplugged, like the wire that runs to the fuel pump itself, the fuel rail, the camshaft position sensor, blow-by sensor. But next I need to disconnect the wiring going to all of the injectors so that I can remove this bulk of wiring. Before you go and break off all the little tabs on this box, trying to open it up so that you can get at the fastener that you think is holding it to the engine, I'll give you a little tip. You don't need to.
The wiring box is mounted to a bracket held on with this bolt that you can easily undo with a 13mm.
The point of this is not to remove the wiring, it's just to separate it from the fuel rail. Obviously, before we can pull the lines off the injectors, we need to get rid of these covers. Now, when I first looked at these, I thought, I don't know how those are going to come off, but they're actually made of rubber and quite flexible, and they're not that bad to peel around to take off. Now, once you've managed to peel them off the front side, you do need to remove the injector return line before you can get it off the back. To remove the return lines, you need to hold down on the two tabs on the side and pull up on the middle. After that, the line should release. If you have difficulty pulling these apart, you may find it a little bit easier with a small flat-bladed screwdriver.
Slip the blade into the small gap and then pivot it up.
Anytime you're working on a high-pressure fuel system like this, it's super important that you protect it from any dirt getting into it. Little tiny bit of dirt at the high pressures that these fuel pumps create will destroy your fuel injectors. Just before I crack these injector nuts loose, I have squirted a little bit of my favorite PB Blaster in there. I live in Canada and we have this thing called corrosion. I just want the nut to be able to freely spin on the fuel pipe as opposed to trying to grab onto it and turn it at the same time.
To start, I'm carefully cracking all the nuts free.
Be really careful getting in there with your wrench. The edge of your wrench as it starts to turn is going to come very close to the return and also to the plug.
You don't get a lot of room to turn them,
but once you get them cracked free, you should be able to turn them relatively easily by hand.
After loosening all the injector nuts, move on to crack free all the nuts on the fuel rail.
And that is why we use PB Blaster. Make sure before you start any of this work that you used compressed air and or a vacuum cleaner to clean everything you possibly can off the top of your engine. Why? Well, again, we don't want dirt or dust getting into the fuel system. Before I completely remove the injector lines, I do want to remove the bolts that hold the injectors in place.
Start by just cracking each bolt free.
You're probably going to want to use a half drive at a minimum. Those suckers are tight. Again, I highly recommend you get some PB Blaster in there, not sponsored. Once you get the bolts cracked free, let this get in underneath and soak down. It will make your life easier.
Don't be afraid to use this stuff. It's worth it. Even more so than I'd realized at this point.
You know, I gotta tell you, I really thought this front bolt was gonna end up snapping off inside the head, which would have been so much more of a disaster. I had it up about this far and it was starting to get stiffer. I decided that I'd get a little pick underneath the washer and I just doused it with PB Blaster, went in and had lunch, came back out, and it's now free. Now, it was definitely still stiff at the beginning, but that bolt is now free enough to come out without snapping off inside the head, which would have sucked. So if you get into a situation like that, don't force it, soak it and let it sit. Now with all four bolts loose, we can take the clamps out and then pull the injectors. remember I've said a couple times now that we need to be very careful to keep dirt and dust out of the fuel system, which is going to get a little bit harder when we start taking it apart. Well, if you've watched any number of my videos, you know that I've designed and 3D printed a solution. These are gray plugs to fill the injector holes on top of the engine, and a cap for the tip of the injector, as well as a double cap for the supply and return line. I've also heard that these injectors can be a huge pain in the butt to get pulled out, so I've picked up a tool to help me with that. This is an injector removal tool, which I picked up on Amazon. I'll throw a link in the video description. If any of them resist, I'll stick the injector removal tool on to pop them out.
But first, let's get these caps on to keep the supply and return fittings protected from any flying debris, and see if we can pull the injectors by hand.
Well, the first two injectors came out by just lifting. Third one is giving me a little bit more trouble. Before I go and put that removal tool on there, I'm gonna grab my vacuum cleaner and just try and get out any more debris that's in here, because I don't want to start some vibrations that send debris down into the cylinders. And then my next step is just dropping one of these blockers that I've printed into each injector hole. They're not a perfect fit, but should just prevent any debris from dropping down in there.
Well, that's better than a huge gaping hole.
This is my first time using this kind of tool, but basically it just is a pneumatic slide hammer that threads onto the top of the injector using the fuel line thread. It's supposed to be pretty simple. You hook the air up and pull the trigger. Woo! That took all of about a quarter second. So let's disconnect the air first so we don't bump it back on by mistake. I'm assuming you saw how quick that injector popped up there. There it is. Injector removed. I would say for the amount of time I probably would have been fighting with that with a slide hammer, that's an easy way to do it. As great of a tool as this is, and as quick as it worked, there is one issue that I am going to have to deal with. Injector number 4 is kindly placed directly underneath this rear cross brace, and there's not enough room to get this in. Even if I had a long skinny extension, it's directly underneath. So I'm going to try something probably a little unconventional, in that I'm not exactly trying to pull the injector up, I just need to free it from being stuck. So can I get this in behind, not on the injector, but on the clamp? If I can rotate the clamp, that's going to break the injector free, and then maybe I can lift it by hand. Well, that is not showing any signs of working at all. So what I've come up with for my next attempt is this. It's kind of like a really badly made, not very adjustable universal joint for an injector puller. And you can see it's on a little bit of an angle.
I have no idea if this is going to work, but it's worth a shot.
So now the idea is I can attach the injector puller up here and hopefully pull it out down there. Now this relies on one thing that I don't know if it's going to work. Once I pop that injector free, does it actually have enough room underneath here to come out far enough to tip back far enough to get out from underneath this? Only one way to find out. That is absolutely not working either. Injector number 4 stays snugly in place. Well, I've got one more little trick I'm going to try, and then I think I'm going to have to go and think for a while.
Can I take the bracket off and break the injector free by turning it with a 13mm wrench?
That is stuck. Well, I guess you could say 3 out of 4 isn't bad. I'd much rather have 4. But I think at this point, I got to go and figure out how I'm going to get this out. I really don't want to take this cross brace out because it goes all the way down to the back of the frame on each side. Now, can you imagine if they just had a section in the middle that removed that kind of looks like they weld at the factory? Sometimes things don't go the way you want. That's where we've been for the last 2 and a bit months. But keep at it. Eventually, you'll get there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.